Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Nicholas Corcel, and you're watching The Literary Nomad. Today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Gabriel García Márquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I already made a video on this channel last year about the first half of the Netflix series, season 1 of the Cien años Netflix show, and I was blown away by it. At the time of watching that, I had not read the book in its entirety. I'd read excerpts from university courses and things like that, but I had not read and I had certainly not understood the magnitude and the wide-sweeping nature of this novel. In preparation for season 2, which just came out, everything except for the finale is currently out right now, I wanted to read the book, and it being summer, having a lot of time off, I felt like it was the perfect time to do it. And so over the last, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, worked my way through the book, and needless to say, I was not disappointed. This was one of those rare occurrences where, when reading the book, I was truly swept away, not only by its quality, which I was. Some of the greatest sentence level and paragraph level writing that I've ever read has come from this book. But the scope and the ambition of the project, I think, is honestly only really comparable to maybe 2666, at least thinking about the things that I have read already. And the idea that if somebody were to ask me, right, what is this book about, right? What is Cien años about? It is almost impossible to give somebody a succinct, reasonable answer that makes sense or does the book justice. And so by this, I was thinking about this, right? I was thinking about how could I describe to somebody what this book is about? What is the gist of this book? Why is it so good? Why does everybody love it so much? And I think that you have to kind of abstract away, right? On a surface level, you could say it's the story of a town, right? It's the story of a family, right? It's the story of the colonial period, of colonial life, of how that has progressed into the modern world, the ups and the downs of that. And that's all true. You could also say it's a story of incest. It's a story of forbidden love, and it's a story of how the corruption of the family will ultimately destroy all, right? You could say that. You could also say it's a story about Latin America. You could say it's a story about God, or you could say it's a story about the world. And I think all of those are true at once, right? I think all of those different things that I just said, they are true, right? They exist on different levels, right? You can kind of pick out religious characters and map them, not perfectly, but you can attempt to do that. I think you could be quite successful at that. You can look at how this is a metaphor for the Latin American experience, right? We can look at Macondo as a city being maybe a stand-in for any of the various countries throughout Latin America, throughout the Caribbean, throughout really any of the colonial world. We see, right, the banana plantation comes into the town. We see wild advancements, right, in technology and culture and all of these things coming around this colonial period, right? The new European stuff, the advancement of the things that they can spend their money on, right? The introduction of consumerism into the village, and how that briefly makes life incredible for the people of Macondo. But then we see how that is corrupted, right, with the 3,000 men or the 3,000 people getting shot down in the square, with the government lying about that, right? We see the gringos kind of colluding with the government, and so we get this idea that these issues, while they are race-based in many ways, they're not race-based in every way, right? This idea that maybe class supersedes race in certain instances, and the government is allying themselves with the gringos in terms of money, in terms of profit, perhaps in retribution for the coronel, who had led a revolution for many, many years in Colombia. I think for me, though, the biggest thing that I would encourage people to take away from this and to take away from Marquez's writing is this resistance of monolithic thinking, right? The experience of Latin America, the experience of the world, the experience of, just simply put, being a person, right, of living life, is not an experience that can be defined in a monolith. All right, and so when I just listed these 10 or 15 or 20 different things that this book could be about, they're all true, right? And they're all true concurrently. they're also true in a way that conflicts with each other, right? These things, let's take the Coronel for example, right? Coronel Aureliano Buendia, the man who took all of the or who led the revolutions, right? In some ways, he is just this great inspirational man, right? He is, I would argue, there's not really a main character, but I would argue he is the main character of the book. He's this great inspirational man. He's the only Buendia that dies standing up, but he gives up, right? He's ultimately unsuccessful. The revolution fails. Macondo dies. Nothing happens, right? He lives his life kind of in pursuit of the self, right? It's all kind of comes out to be just a exercise in his own pride, right? And so there is no good and bad. At least there's no good and bad monolithically. Of course, we have a couple characters here and there, like the guys who gunned down the people at the train station, or the leader of the banana plantation. Sure, we could maybe say that. But the ideas that Marquez introduces are complex. They're complex and they're ambiguous, and both of those are by nature. I know I was reading online in preparation for this video. I was looking at some different resources discussing Marquez, discussing how he thinks about his writing, how he goes about the process. And he talked about sometimes he will write these paragraphs or even sentences, and he won't know himself what the exact meaning is, right? Somebody was asking him, I can't remember what exact passage it was, but somebody was asking him, what is the meaning of this passage, of this paragraph? And he said, I don't know. I don't know exactly. I can't quantify that exactly. I just know that when I had written it, that I had arrived on something that was special, right? That superseded maybe the normal, the sense of normalcy, right? Maybe that it reached into the sublime, right? It reached into some other plane that we aren't able to often tap into, right? He knows and he's able to recognize when he does it, but he can't necessarily tell you what that means or why or how necessarily he did it. And I think really, in essence, that idea is kind of what makes this book so special, is that there are these moments where he reaches into the sublime, right? Where he reaches into these other planes, and we're able to hint at these ideas and to hint at this complexity and the nuance of personhood, of being alive, without it being direct symbolism, right? There's really nothing in this book that is like, I don't know, rose equals love. Rose dies, love is corrupted, right? It's not, the symbolism is not simplistic at all like that. There's really nothing like that in this book, right? It is something that you have to think about, that you have to chew on, that my interpretation, my favorite characters might not be the same as yours, might not be the same as somebody else's, etc., etc. And it straddles that line between being an accessible book and then also being like an intellectual book, right? It gives you these things to think about, but it's also very easy to read, right? The writing of this book is super simple, and just to kind of illustrate that point, I'd like to read maybe just the first sentence, right? The first sentence of the book. It tells us everything really you need to know without telling us anything at all. All right, here we go. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Coronel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. At that time, Macondo was a village of 20 adobe houses built on the bank of a river of clear water that ran along a bed of polished stones, which were white and enormous, like prehistoric eggs. And so those were two sentences. I know I said I was going to read one, but that right there tells you everything you need to know. Right? It invokes the revolutionary spirit, which is going to loop through over and over again, right? Even when Arcadio Segundo comes and he builds in the railroad, and then he becomes the foreman, and then he leads the failed revolution against the fruit company. Aureliano himself, Arcadio, who kind of like becomes Napoleon, right? We have the little Napoleon subplot. We have that moment. We have the discovery of ice, right? This is a motif that kind of keeps coming back. Right, it's funny to think about, and it's especially funny to see in the show. Right, that kind of, it lands a little bit better in the show than it does in the book. But this idea of ice as a new invention, right? When the gypsies, when Milquiades, when they come to Macondo, ice is this just fantastical, magical thing that they've never experienced before. Right? You think about this. This is Colombia, like 150 years ago, 140 years ago. And so ice is this is magic. Ice is magic. And everything is magic, right? Everything that they discover is magic, and then that magic is eventually wielded against them, and then it repeats. New magic is introduced, it's wielded against them. New magic against them. So we get that, but we get the amazement. Right? Buendias, they continue to fall for the same things over and over and over again. Sorry about that, my memory card just was full. But going back to what I was saying, right? This constant idea, or this constant repetition of amazement, right? We start with the ice, it continues with the railroad, with all of the other things, right? They continue to find themselves amazed by something, they get obsessed with that thing that they are amazed by, and then that thing ends up harming them, and then the next generation does it again with something else, right? There's always one guy that is like that in every generation, and there's also kind of like the lazy loafing guy, and that kind of flip-flops and intersects throughout the different generations as the family tree kind of coalesces onto itself, as it kind of in some ways becomes a big circle, as the incest becomes more pronounced, as more and more people, at least at the beginning, have children with Pilar. This becomes increasingly complex and convoluted. Like if you look at the beginning of the book, I'll just show it to you on the screen. This is not one of my favorite ones of this family tree. There's better ones in other editions of the book, but this is the one that this book has, and it kind of shows you how the family shapes out. There's some really good graphics though that you can look up that shows you a more visual element of it, which I would recommend checking out. I also think if you're going to read this book, it can be tempting a lot of times to use a lot of online resources for these larger, more significant, I guess we could say, works in the literary canon. This is a book that I think you can do that with, and you can get some meaningful information out, but I don't think that you have to in the same way that you would with maybe, I don't know, Infinite Jest or 2666 or War and Peace, or I don't know, even something like Les Mis. I think this book, you can kind of just read and interface with it almost like a page turner, right? It's like a very interesting story. There's lots of action. It's exciting. It's just fun, right? It's a fun read, and then it gives you those deeper thoughts to chew on when you want to, if you want to. All right, you can fly through this in 3-4 days. Miss a lot, of course, but you'll have a really enjoyable time, right? So you could fly through it, watch the Netflix show, and then maybe a year later, a couple months later, come back and go deeper. And I think that would really probably lend itself to the best reading of this. That's kind of what I plan on doing. I think this is going to be a book that I go back to again and again. It's probably going to be a book and an IP that I revisit on this channel multiple times. I know I just finished season 2 of the show, which, full disclosure, I don't think was as good as season 1. I don't know if that was their fault, because I also don't think that the second half of the book is as good as the first half. I think when Coronel Aureliano Buendia dies, I think that the book gets much worse. Still great, but much worse. But I do think I will make another video with some more rounded out, more robust thoughts on the show itself once the finale comes out on the 26th. I think that makes the most sense, especially considering the first part of that was one of my more popular videos that I've ever made on the channel so far. I think it makes sense to do that, and I'm really excited to hear what some of your guys' thoughts are on the book, on the show, on the two of them together, on the differences, on the similarities. I don't really have any complaints about how they portrayed it. I think that this is a tough book to portray. I think magical realism can feel corny. I know there's a Murakami adaptation that I've seen some clips of that is crazy and looks terrible. So it can be hard to take some of these things from the page and kind of translate it again. I think keeping it in the Spanish helped a lot with some translation issues. But even just translating the medium, right? Translating from the written medium, where due to the power, due to the evocativeness of Marquez's writing, he's able to kind of make us buy in and make us kind of overlook or maybe believe some of these crazier elements, like when Remedios the Beauty ascends into the heavens. That looked kind of crazy on the show. It still worked, I thought. I think it worked as well as it could, but that is something that is better to read than to watch. But anyways, I digress. I'm very interested to read some of your guys' thoughts on this and to think about or to engage with you guys with what's going through your head. I think this book is great for that. I think it's a great launching point for discussion. And so I do really look forward to hearing what you guys all have to say. So please leave a comment down below. Let me know some of your thoughts on either the book, the show, this review, the bigger ideas, whatever's on your mind. And I will see you shortly in the next one where we'll talk about the series. Bye.